Right. My watch says it's 4:20, so I'm going to get started. Good afternoon and welcome. As you know, my workshop is called Beyond Demand High, Making Quality Learning Happen for All. And before I start, a reminder and a question. The reminder is that this, as the blurb said, is a workshop, which means, as you know, I would need your participation. So there will be activities where I'm going to ask questions and there will be tasks. So I encourage you and invite you to participate. And the question is around, because my blurb said this is a talk particularly for teacher educators, but teachers are also welcome. Just to know very quickly who my audience is. So can you please raise your hand if you're a teacher, trainer, or educator, please? Okay. Good attendance. Academic managers? Okay, less well represented, but good. Teachers? Thank you. Academics without the manager? Okay, thank you. Publishers? Okay. Any other creature? Yay, some people put their hands up. I like those. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get started. 5 years ago, in this very place, in the 46th annual conference happening here at Glasgow, was the first time that the field of ELT heard the words demand and high put together in that order. And I think 5 years later, it's an interesting thing to look back and see what the impact has been. And to look at the things that have really helped us think and that are still relevant 5 years on, but also critically examine probably some of the limitations. And I'm inviting this reflection as a constructive discussion. As Jim Scrivener himself said, we offer demand high as an idea that is not fixed and which is available for discussion and evolution. So it's in this spirit that I invite us to think about this. So what's the plan for this workshop? First of all, I assume that if you have chosen to come to this talk, you are familiar with the concept of demand high. But you know, it's never a bad idea to review a bit. So we're going to be looking together at demand high ELT in a nutshell. The second part of the workshop is examining demand high ELT, putting it, if you like, under the microscope and looking at its contributions and its limitations. And the third part of the workshop is what I suggest could be a direction beyond demand high, which is towards evidence-informed and impactful ELT pedagogies. So let's get started. You will have to work now. So I'm going to ask you in groups of 3 or 4, and you only have 2 minutes, so you have to be quick. What do you know or remember about demand high teaching starting now? "30 seconds. Okay, let's pretend I've elicited, and this is the bit where I tell you, okay? Jim Scrivener and Adrian Underhill, in their blog, talk about 3 phases of demand high, and I kind of gave them these names. So phase 1, more about this in a minute. Some observations about teaching and learning and the state of teaching and learning in ELT, some questions that were posed to us, and a provisional manifesto. At phase 2, moving from a more, if you like, philosophical stance to more practical suggestions. And the third stage, which we're still kind of in it and trying to see what comes of it, is formulating detailed guidelines. So in phase 1, Adrian Underhill and Jim Scrivener say that communicative language teaching kind of had painted itself into a corner, and that there's a lot of very active and interactive activity in language lessons, games and ritualized forms of interacting and groupings, etc. However, it's very difficult to see people getting dirty with language, people really, really focusing on the business of language, teaching and language learning. So these are some of the key observations that Jim and Adrian made at the time. They said that much contemporary teaching is good enough. However, it is unchallenging and has low expectations of learners and learning. They said that there seemed to be a taint of guilt in teachers to doing demanding and focused language work. That there seemed to be a fear and even an avoidance of more assertive and supportive intervention. In other words, teachers teaching. And they suggested that we as a profession have kind of misinterpreted humanistic education and the idea of facilitation as bland, being nice to students and praising when, you know, that what they were producing wasn't really good enough sometimes. They also suggested the idea that we seem to be teaching at a distance from learning. So we're more focused on the activity and activity management and what's coming next in the plan and edutainment, if you like, rather than getting up close and observing learning happening and to influence learning, to shape it and to affect it. They also asked very important, I would say, questions, and here are some of the key ones. How can I push my students to upgrade their language and improve their skills more? What teacher interventions make a real difference to learning? How can I shift my preoccupation from successful task and task management to optimal learning? In other words, how can I shift my preoccupation from teaching to facilitating effective learning? How can we transform undoable or low demand into doable demand? So those were the questions that Jim and Adrian were asking 5 years ago. And they came up with this provisional manifesto, as they called it. And here are some of the statements. It is okay to teach. It is okay to intervene. We need to focus on where the learning is. Let's work at everyone's pace and not just the fastest few. Let's learn the classroom management techniques that do make a difference. And let's risk working hands-on with language. Let's get dirty. And let's expect more and demand high. So this is phase 1. And Jim and Adrian say that everybody was saying, this is great, but what do we do in the classroom? And this is phase 2. You know, what they say, this is not a methodology, it's not an approach, it's not a method, it's not an anti-method. These are just tweaks. Because after all, demand high is an attitude. But this is what you could do to your practice. And here came some of the suggestions. You must have heard, and I don't have time to go deeply into this, just a reminder that we're talking about, for example, 3XP, 3 times practice, the idea that you don't just do a task once and move on very swiftly after rubber stamping, that you revisit and do the task in a different way to create deeper learning. Or, for example, proof, the idea of offering a playful kind of challenge, opportunities for repetition, and to upgrade, feedback that upgrades the student's language. So these were some of the ideas that were being offered as tweaks to practice. Phase 3, well, Jim Scrivener in the blog says, now we are wondering, can we formulate something more concrete and accessible for classroom teachers? Not just a set of raw ideas. phase one, but detailed guidelines for teaching that teachers can read and experiment with. And a thought of maybe changing the name from demand high to learning-centered teaching. So that's where we are at this time. So let's now put demand high ELT under the microscope, and let's look at the contributions and limitations and time for you to work. So I'm going to ask you again in 2 minutes to discuss that question with your group. So in your opinion and in your experience, if you have used some of those techniques, what are the contributions and the limitations of demand high teaching? Thank you. Okay. So, thank you. I'll now share what, in my humble opinion, I think are the contributions of demand high, and great ones for that. I really do think that the phase one observations, in many cases, they still very accurately capture much current ELT practice. There's still a lot of unchallenging teaching, undemanding task, and a lot of edutainment, if I'm honest. Also, I think that the phase one questions really do go to the heart of impactful teaching. Who can argue with those questions there? How can I push my students to upgrade their language? What teacher interventions make a real difference? They are fantastic questions. And they're very, very helpful catalysts of reflection and of professional dialogue among teachers and teacher trainees and teacher educators. Really wonderful questions. I think we need to keep asking ourselves. In terms of the limitations, this is Scribner in 2014 in an article saying, over time, we have been assembling a large selection of classroom techniques that seem to us likely to lead to more challenging teaching and greater learning. And for me here, we've missed a trick. The evidence. What is the proof for proof? And I really do want to hear, show me the evidence that these tweaks actually work. In the age of big data, we don't have perfect knowledge, but we know so much more about how learners learn and how we can teach them. It seems to me that it's a shame that we are not making use of research evidence to answer the question, what teacher interventions make a real difference? And also, some of the suggested tweaks in phase two, there is absolutely no evidence, there's no robust, if you like, evidence that those tweaks are effective in delivering what they aim to achieve, which is quality and depth of learning. In other words, I think that demand high and what it has to offer is very, very strong on two dimensions of pedagogy. Pedagogy that sees teaching as a craft. In other words, there's a very strong focus on mastery of a repertoire of classroom techniques and skills and practices and tweaks, classroom management, etc. Also very, very strong on pedagogy that sees teaching as an art, responsive, creative, intuitive, responding to what the learners are doing, the emerging learning, getting dirty and all that. Very important. However, I think where we're missing a trick here is in pedagogy that looks at the science of teaching. Teaching that is about research-informed decision-making. There's also a strong focus on the need for the teacher to see where the learning is, which is fabulous. However, in my opinion, the suggested techniques, there is talk of listening and watching and thinking and using your intuition. It's what we have always done. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's what we have always done, and that they have not necessarily helped teachers make learning even more visible or more tangible. So we do need to start looking more deeply at this question. What other things can we do for getting closer to where the learning is? And the same thing around looking for upgrade steps for every individual in class and not just the 3 fastest. Again, the recommended strategies, for example, this sort of individual focus in the whole class, to me, they don't go far enough. They reflect a kind of pre-differentiation mindset. So, I'm not saying this is the solution. I'm just saying this is something we need to look at more. I'm saying there's so much in demand high, so much. But I'm saying, shall we go beyond this a bit and look at impactful and evidence-informed pedagogies? And a word of caution here. I'm not saying that evidence-based teaching and learning is the holy grail of teaching at all. And when I use the word evidence-informed practice here, I'm only saying, let's make conscious and judicious use of the evidence base when we make planning decisions, when we make teaching decisions, when we make assessment decisions for individual learners. So we are using the evidence in a very informed but also conscious way, and we look at that evidence in my context. I'm not just using the evidence blindly and decontextualized. So my influences that shape my thinking around this they don't come necessarily from ELT, and I don't apologize for that, and I don't have a problem with that, because for me, English language teaching is a modern foreign language. And modern foreign languages are curricular subjects, and therefore, the pedagogy and the teacher research done in mainstream education has a lot to give and a lot to say to language teaching. So I am drawing on the work of, for example, Professor John Hattie, his meta-analysis, and the notion of visible learning. Also, I'm inspired by the work of the Education Endowment Foundation here in the UK and their Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which I strongly recommend you have a look at if you haven't done that before. It's a website, just Google. But also the work of the Assessment Reform Group and the Teaching and Learning Research Program around assessment for learning, and lately also the work of Professor Rob Coe. So, what I'm doing here is I'm just giving you 3 examples because I've got 26 minutes left. I'm not claiming for a second that these are the Holy Grail. I'm not saying that these are the 3 unique. I'm just saying these are 3 examples that basically scratch the surface of the tip of the iceberg of what we can do. And these are 3 interventions that make a difference in the sense that there is evidence that they do create more meaningful, deeper, more visible and tangible learning. I'm going to be talking about the 3 of them, and we're going to be doing some work on these. The first one is sharing learning intentions with students. The second one, if you went to Anna Young's talk yesterday, she was talking about how she worked with the success criteria, so this might be familiar to you. And the third one, seeking out quality feedback on learning. So, let's get started with sharing learning intentions. This is kind of obvious, isn't it? Sharing learning intentions. Now, what I mean, first of all, I want to talk about this for a minute because there is evidence that it is an impactful intervention. And what do I mean by sharing learning intentions? I'm not just saying write the outcome in difficult language. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying, just simply say to the students what we are learning today, to what level, and why. As simple as that. And why? Because if I and you, I as your teacher and you as my students, commit to a direction of travel in this lesson, in this unit, it's because it's important. So you need to know that it's important. I need to know that it's important. And by doing that, in a way, when I'm planning the lesson and when we're working in the lesson, we are less in danger of getting distracted and digressing with what doesn't matter. But equally, there is less fluff. If I really care about going and getting there, and you care about going and getting there, there is less need of fluff and edutainment and more motivation. So this idea that they make the focus and the direction of the lesson explicitly clear, both to me as a teacher and to you. What are good learning intentions? As I said, they state these answers to these questions. What do we want students to learn or to achieve? To what level? And why do we want them to learn this? Of course, they're specific and they're clear to the students. But very, very important, they are ambitious and appropriately challenging. And this is the trick. Hattie says, they have to be ambitious. They have to be challenging because it is the right level of difficulty that keeps the learners engaged and motivated and wanting to achieve. So here's an example, as simple as this. So I'm not talking by the end of the lesson you will be able to know. Today, you will learn to use the passive voice accurately to explain the process of rubbish recycling. This will help you describe the processes appropriately in reports for IELTS writing task 2. So here we have the what we're going to be learning. We've got the how, or to what level, if you like. And we've got the why. So a simple example. So, teacher educators, think about the classes and the teachers that you teach and observe. If you're teachers, think about your own practice or practices that of your peers, if you peer observe. Can I ask you to discuss the questions? I'm not going to read them out because they're visible to everybody, and you've got 3 minutes to discuss these questions. Thank you. Okay, thank you. These are the issues that as a trainer, as a teacher educator, I notice. particularly with teachers and trainees work on learning intentions. A lot of it, by learning intentions, I mean, what they say and communicate to the students in class, but we can also think about those in terms of when they plan the aims of the lesson and maybe the outcomes. So really, lack of clarity. A lot of the time they're very vague and they're unclear and they are not sufficiently challenging and not differentiated. So there's a perception that the class is a homogeneous uniformity, beautiful, people with the same level who can do the same things in exactly the same ways. But also worded as activities or stages in the lesson. So there isn't a sense of direction. There isn't a sense of destination. There's a sense of I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, which is activity management. But also I notice issues with us, the trainers themselves, or the directors of studies, in that we don't always give teachers sufficient or regular feedback on on learning intentions. It's the kind of thing that we kind of gloss over because we care more about the procedure or how they, the knowledge of the learners rather than, okay, let's make this really clear and specific. And also, I feel that we don't always consider it important that teachers get learning intentions right. So there's insufficient practice on this in training courses and programs. So just do them, but we don't think about how we can create really smart learning outcomes and intentions. So some practical strategies for teachers that we could tell teachers and encourage teachers to do and try. Display and communicate the learning intentions at the start of the lesson, or, more interesting, produce them in conjunction with the students. Not necessarily at the start of that lesson, but the week before or the lesson before. So where are we going in the next lesson, and why are we going there? Check with the students that their clarity, I need evidence. So checking is fundamental, that they are clear about their learning intentions and why. Talk to the students about why they're studying, what they're studying, but also ask the students. So it's not something, I've seen a lot of practice where people just say, today we're going to do, and then they completely forget. It's just because they feel they need to do it. But there is no going back to the learning intentions and self-assessing the learning against the intentions at different points in the lesson, going back, reviewing, evaluating. So, we could be encouraging teachers to do this, but also give teachers feedback on how well they're doing this regularly. These are Professor Mary James's questions that she suggests teachers could benefit from asking themselves when planning very interesting questions to demand high. What specific learning outcomes do I expect students to achieve by the end of this lesson, this unit, or this course? And do I expect all learners to achieve these, or do I need to differentiate? Because this creates differentiated learning intentions, and that dictates the differentiation in the lesson. Differentiation, of course, is reactive. Of course, it's an art, but it can also be proactive and planned. Are my expectations sufficiently high for all? So I'm looking no longer at the homogeneous mass, but I'm looking at my individuals. How will I communicate these expectations to the students in a clear way? How can students be involved in objective setting? How will I and they know that they have achieved these outcomes? What evidence will we seek together? How can I remain alert to the emerging, if you like, to the learning outcomes that I might not have expected but are also valuable? And let's detour together if we agree. Second intervention, working with success criteria. What do I mean by success criteria? They are statements that describe upfront how both the teacher and the learners will know that they have been successful in achieving the learning intention. I'm going to give you examples in a minute, very specific and concrete examples. But first, let me tell you why it's important to use success criteria. Now, John Hattie says that developing success criteria as a teacher and with the learners is not just one more, it's a vital element of formative assessment. And of course, my fundamental task as a teacher is formative assessment, is to evaluate the effect of my teaching on my students' learning and achievement. So very important. So here are some examples from my colleagues at Bell Cambridge. This is Anna Young, and this is a level A2 class. And you know how sometimes books have got tasks, like describe a picture, and here's the picture, and that's it, and it ends there. Success criteria can shape that more and make the whole task much more relevant, achievable, and motivating for learners. So this is what Anna has done with that task, helping the students understand how to succeed. So in order to describe a picture successfully, you need to describe where the people are, And here is the differentiation, using a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 8 prepositions, if you like. Describe what clothes people are wearing. Use between 5 and 10 verbs in the present continuous correctly. Now, Anna has not just done this, but this is what she's done with the learning, in the success criteria, sorry. So, shared it with the students, made sure that they understand them, here they are, and then she's got them to choose a target time. So, in how long can you do this? And this is where, again, there's differentiation and personalization. And then the students self-assess against the success criteria, but also against, the planned time, the target time, and the real time, and comment on how well they did. So the success criteria then are used after the lesson, or after the task, to evaluate how well they have done. Another example, this is another colleague, Emily. Her class was a B2 first certificate class, and the students were practicing part 2 of the speaking task, the long turn. And the task said, talk about 2 photos on your own for a minute, then answer the question the examiner asks. So what has Emily done with this? Success criteria. Use correct forms of comparative adjectives, so describing the 2 pictures, remember. Use language to talk about similarities, to talk about differences, use vocabulary related to the topic of the photos, use linkers correctly, and answer the question. And what has Emily done with these success criteria? The students were supposed to be doing the task, so she has encouraged the peer to listen to the partner speaking for a minute, and not just tick. So did he use comparatives? Yes, no. But to write specific examples of the things that they heard them use. So very clear feedback on whether they were meeting the criteria or not. And also do a bit of, at the end, a bit of medal and mission feedback. So something you did well. Next time you could try. And notice that there is a first time, a second time, and a third time, so that they repeat the task, and with the feedback they get better. So in the lesson, what happened there was, first the student who did the task assessed herself against the success criteria. Then the peer assessed the peer using the success criteria and giving them very clear, specific, and focused feedback. Very different from very nice, good, very, very useful. And then the teacher herself gave feedback using success criteria. So they were all working towards the same success criteria. Interestingly, I looked at, considering how impactful an intervention it is in education, I looked at certificate programs and diploma programs to see whether there is any input at all, or whether they feature at all in the syllabuses. And guess what? No. So one thing I would really like to see is, that teacher training programs start using, including content on success criteria. So a quick thermometer task. These are the options. So I'm going to show you 2 sentences in a minute. So if this is something that you always do, can I ask you to do this? If it's something that you do from time to time, do this. And if you haven't done it until now, do this. And this is, of course, an invitation to try it. So this is the first statement. I teach teachers explicitly about success criteria. Okay. Come on, show me your thumbs. Right. Mixed audience. I see a lot of, and quite a lot of, and less. Thank you. I expect teachers to work with success criteria in their own lessons. Okay, quite a bit of that, some that. Okay, thank you. Mixed thumbs, thank you. Okay, finally, seeking out feedback on learning. Now, why focus on high quality, visible, tangible learning feedback techniques? Here I'm quoting both John Hattie and the work of Black and William. Feedback has one of the most significant effects on learning. Taking feedback and giving feedback. And a reminder that I, as a teacher, seek out feedback, and that assessment is about my impact on student learning. I cannot possibly know the impact of my teaching on my students' learning if I throw a question at the ether, don't nominate individuals, and the first 2 fastest, strongest students shout out the answer. Can't know that. So, 2 minutes. Can I ask you to discuss those 2 questions? Okay, thank you. This is a typical planning that I see. So certificate, initial teacher training trainees in lesson plans, saying and writing things like whole group feedback, answers to exercise 4A. And then, like when they're more experienced in service, in the diploma, for example, teacher elicits feedback on the questions from the class. So not much of a difference, is there, in the level of detail and careful thought? For me, the question is, how are you going to do that? Considering it's such an important intervention, I think we have a problem with feedback, really. And I think it's a bit like the Cinderella of planning. It's overlooked. In the programs that we teach, we don't really pay much attention. Well, this is my experience. We don't really pay much attention to feedback techniques. And therefore, it's unplanned and it's vague. And because it's vague and it's unplanned, people kind of improvise. So it becomes repetitive. They always do the same thing throughout the lesson. So really not very effective. So when we became aware at Bell that this was an important thing that we needed to look at, and we read the research and the implications, we thought, well, the first thing we need to do is to understand what else we could be doing and how we could give and elicit feedback that's really, really impactful, and it helps me understand what every single student in my classroom is thinking. So we've been playing, if you like, with a broader range of feedback techniques. I don't have time to explain, but there's a task coming. So, you've got a handout. Hopefully everybody has a handout to hand. If not, pair up with somebody who has. And on the first page, page 1, there's a table which I invite you to complete using. So what it does is it lists a number of feedback strategies to evaluate the impact of teaching on learning. And I will ask you to decide whether these are techniques that you often, sometimes, or rarely use at 3 levels. So on the first column is if you use this strategy yourself to model good practice when you teach teachers. Second column, if you teach this strategy explicitly, so not just model, but actually teach it explicitly in the courses that you teach. And then finally, or in CPD programs, if you encourage and expect the teachers that you teach to implement these strategies. So if you demand high. Okay? So, if you don't know what these are, or some of these are, don't worry, you just don't do it, clearly, but it doesn't matter. You've got an explanation of every one of them. So if you want to read quickly and then read more deeply on the train or on the plane back home. But we only have, I would say, 5 minutes max. So have a look and assess yourself if you want by yourself. If you want to have a conversation, have a conversation. Okay, thank you. I won't have time for questions here and now, but I live in stand 92. So if you want to talk to me and continue the conversation, not just with me, but with all my colleagues at Bell, come along. Please feel free to ask questions, to make comments, etc. What I want to say about these, again, these are not the holy grail. And some teachers, we've been experimenting with these feedback techniques. Some teachers prefer some to others, but in general, some combine techniques, but in general, the feeling is that we are much more able to understand where the learning is, and we're much more able to see what the students are thinking, and that's what we really wanted to achieve. So, I'm going back to this slide because I think it's a very important reminder. Demand High has been great at posing fundamental questions, and I think we need to keep asking those fundamental questions and keep challenging the notion that we need to offer the students more challenge, and we need to get even more dirty, not just with the language, but also with the learning. We are here to help people learn. And I think that, in a way, Demand High reflects the nature of our activity. We, as a profession, I think, overall, we're very strong in teaching as a craft. We have developed a good and broad repertoire of techniques particularly over the last 30 or 40 years, and also teaching as an art, as a creative endeavor, and that's fundamental. It's about teaching human beings, after all, and it's about relating with human beings. I'm not saying for a second that that is not important. What I am saying is that I think in many cases we have forgotten about teaching as a science. And I think that this is a great, great moment with all the big data and all the meta-analysis and all the educational research and all the investment in education to start using that information and start creating research as well, teacher research and educational research, to understand better how students learn and how we can teach them in a localized way as well, in a way that's contextually important to our own context. So thank you very much for being here.